There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. Program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here by the grace of God. By the way, folks, we are on YouTube. You can dial us in 24/7. Sometimes our radio program is carried there. Sometimes it's not. But if you want to give us a try, welcome aboard. Starting on the international scene, I have warned you over the past few weeks of rising escalations that could lead to a world war. And certainly, we were watching the situation in Hong Kong. You can watch television about every night. Even CNN will give you updates on that. Riots about every weekend. The Chinese getting ready to go in. We'll have more on that in this program. South Korea tossing missiles over toward Japan, pushing Trump to the edge. But the most serious thing seems to be, in fact, it is, between Israel and Iran. The fighting has dramatically escalated there as both sides prepare for the final war. Are we about ready to see World War III erupt in the Middle East? Over the past couple of weeks, Israel has attempted to prevent attacks by Iranian forces and their allies by striking targets in Syria, Gaza, Lebanon, and Iraq. Political leaders in both Lebanon and Iraq are now accusing Israel of, quote, a declaration of war, end quote, and Hezbollah is pledging to strike Israel back extremely hard. Of course, if a full-blown war erupts between Israel and her neighbors, it'll likely become a multi-front war almost immediately. But folks, at the core of all this is the conflict between Israel and Iran. The Iranians have repeatedly pledged to wipe the nation of Israel off the face of the planet. And the coming final war is going to literally be a matter of life and death for these two nations. The Bible has something to say about that, doesn't it, folks? Meanwhile, both sides have been preparing for this final war for a very long time. And once it finally erupts, the death and destruction that we're going to witness is going to be off the charts. Us Christians have seen something on that in our reading of His holy word. Anyway, just within the last few days, the fighting has escalated dramatically as the Israelis have conducted operations in 4 different territories. Israeli forces openly claimed attacks over the past weekend in Syria and the Palestinian-administrated Gaza Strip, and they were blamed for 2 more operations in Lebanon and Iraq. As reports of what occurred across the region emerged, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hinted at his country's ongoing efforts abroad, telling a Monday planning meeting that we, quote, will deepen our roots and strike out at our enemies, an end of his quote. The attacks in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq specifically targeted Iranian forces and their allies, and the goal was to prevent imminent attacks against Israel. In Syria, Israeli warplanes killed 2 members of the Lebanese Hezbollah. Israel says the individuals were supporting an Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps plot to launch explosive-laden drones into Israel. The Israelis say that the specific Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps unit, the one that was responsible, was a Quds force. If true, the Quds force was likely using Hezbollah as a deniable proxy to avoid direct links between the plot and Tehran. In another operation in Lebanon, Israel targeted another Iranian allied group, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. In Iraq, senior Iran aligned forces accused Israel of another airstrike. While missiles are not being flying directly back and forth between Israel and Iran, at this point at least, the state of war essentially exists, and many are deeply concerned about what's going to happen next. In particular, it looks like Hezbollah could launch a large-scale attack against Israel at any moment. Their leadership is absolutely furious that the Israelis recently hit their headquarters building in Beirut. Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, threatened a week ago to attack Israel in retaliation for a drone attack over the weekend. This was on the organization's headquarters in Beirut. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are at their highest point since the 2006 war. And the Lebanese government itself is extremely angry as well. In fact, the president of Lebanon has stated publicly that what Israel has just done is essentially the equivalent of, quote, a declaration of war, end quote. The Lebanese president met Monday with the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon, and they were calling Israeli moves in Beirut a declaration of war. The statement echoed the words of Iraq's powerful Fatah alliance, which calls separate strikes that killed a militia commander in the border town of Al-Qain a declaration of war on Iraq and its people. This according to the Associated Press. This is an extremely serious situation. Israel is literally on the brink of war with Hezbollah, and many feel that such a war is inevitable. Ultimately, nothing is going to be able to stop the massive war that's coming to the region. The Iranians and all of their allies have a religiously fueled hatred for Israel that most people living in the Western world will never understand. And they're absolutely obsessed with permanently destroying the nation of Israel as it exists today. They say we don't understand it, but we believers do understand it, don't we? We've read the book. There'll never be peace between the two sides, and the coming apocalyptic conflict will literally be a battle for national survival. This can definitely be described as a time of wars and rumors of war, and the situation on the ground is extremely fluid right now. The fact that the Israelis have another national election coming up adds another layer of complexity to all of this, and that election may cause events to accelerate even faster than many were anticipating. Folks, let's pray for peace, because right now tensions are extremely high and things are about to spiral out of control. And when a full-blown war does break out, it's highly likely that the U.S. will be involved, and that will have enormous implications for all of us. Yeah, amen to that. On the Hong Kong situation, watch your What Nightly News. Even CNN has it. This past week, Chinese troop movement into Hong Kong prompted a lot of unease. Movements which had been portrayed as a scheduled troop rotation came days ahead of anti-government protests. These protests are every weekend now. Chinese military vehicles have been seen moving across the border into Hong Kong in what the military said were regular troop movements. This as fears rose that the city could see a Beijing-led crackdown after months of political unrest. Following witness reports of the moment in the early hours of last Thursday, state-run news agency released a report that the Hong Kong garrison of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, that's called PLA, was making a scheduled rotation and that it was a, quote, annual normal routine movement, end quote. The image published showed armored carriers and trucks carrying troops at the border and a naval vessel arriving in Hong Kong. In the previous two rotations in 2017 and 18, state media reports noted that the number of troops and equipment had not changed. This year, the report doesn't include that detail. It's estimated that there are between 8,000 and 10,000 troops in the garrison on either side of the border. And another noted article on Hong Kong asks, is China's troop deployment nothing but a routine and planned mission? Or is China taking advantage of a simple pretext to beef up its Hong Kong presence ahead of what many have said will be, quote, critical clashes? We're going to find out soon enough, one way or another. Beijing will need to resolve the ongoing Hong Kong mutiny before the October 1st National Day of the PRC holiday, which is when the Chinese president will be compelled to demonstrate to China and the world that he remains fully in control in Hong Kong. Well, more on China on a different shot. Trump is stating that his terrorist primary tool is a primary tool in negotiating with China. President Donald Trump declared his trade war with China and claimed the U.S. tariffs are his primary tool for negotiations. His comments came in a news radio broadcast last Thursday. And he maintained his strategy for dealing with China is working. They're coming to the table, he said. Fox News noted that Trump had said that the G7 meeting in France that despite mounting tariffs on both sides, he believes China wants to make a deal. Just a couple of days ago, China blinked first on tariffs. They didn't match some that we had given that in return for some that Trump had issued on them. Again, it looks like China blinked. You know, let me ask you this. What do you think happens when a bunch of unpopular leaders greet Trump? It's what happened at the G7. By any measurement, President Trump is the strongest trunk in the forest. From President Emmanuel Macron to Angela Merkel to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada, most current national leaders would love to have his approval ratings. Yeah, they're low. He's an unpopular president. According to Real Clear Politics, his polling average is only 43.3% of Americans approving of his performance. 538, which weighs polls by quality, sample size, and partisan lean, puts the average at 41.6. But as our president met with the leaders of the other G7 countries in the French resort city this past weekend, he can take solace in the fact that he's more popular than almost all of his peers. The lone exception seems to be the Japanese premier, Abe. His cabinet approval rating is 48.8%. Only 32% of the Germans polled by broadcaster ARD a few weeks ago noted that they were satisfied with German Chancellor Angela Merkel's government. In Canada, Trudeau's approval rating was 41% in one poll, 39% in another, and 33% agreed that he has done a good job and deserved to be reelected. 33%. And then there's French President Emmanuel Macron, the one other more or less freely directed head of state. This is more or less free directed as opposed to a leader of a parliamentary government. He came to the G7 meeting, and he is the least popular of the bunch, only 28% approval rating in the most recent poll done on him. What does it mean? Well, at first glance, it doesn't mean much to U.S. voters because our media is going to focus on the blunt Trump and his personality and how abrasive he is. Inside the meeting, Trump's political strength worked well for him. Politicians always look up to the guy with higher approval ratings than their own. They do want to be popular, you know. Let's hope that the leaders of the other countries learn that the U.S. economy is doing better because of growth-orientated policies that encourage investment. The president isn't doing so bad, is he? Just listen to our mainline media. Yeah. Now let's come over to the U.S. and let's come to the North Carolina in particular, and we're going to cover a big variety of items in the time remaining on our program. President Trump will be traveling to Fayetteville, North Carolina for a campaign rally on September 9th. That's one day before the special election to fill a congressional seat that's been vacant all year. Trump will campaign for the Republican candidate in the race. He is State Senator Dan Bishop of Charlotte. Democrat Dan McCready and two others are also running. The 9th district election was held last November, but state officials ordered a redo after an investigation found evidence of fraud involving the collection of mail-in ballots. The Republican who ran last year didn't run again now. Folks, listeners, encourage your friends, people you know, or any relatives that live in that 9th district to be sure and get out and get a vote. This is a vote for or against Pelosi. This is Pelosi's House of Representatives. This is a Republican seat, and the polls have just a couple of points difference in the latest polling done. We need to get that one in the bag, folks. Another local North Carolina report made national news this past week. Did you know that the Charlotte police are canceling all vacations in fear of major violence during the GOP convention scheduled for Charlotte next August, a year from now? Respected journalist Paul Sperry took to Twitter with a report about the sort of violence that police in Charlotte, North Carolina expect when the GOP holds its convention there exactly 1 year from now. CMPD stands for Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. They serve the entire county, and of course Charlotte is the county seat. Personally, I'm old, far older than most of those planning to disrupt that convention. I remember vividly the riots that took place in the 1968 Democrat National Convention in Chicago. The anti-war fanatics, including yippies, who later were dubbed the Chicago Seven, were put on trial. They didn't want Vice President Hubert Humphrey to receive the nomination and continue the Vietnam War policy of his boss. That was President Lyndon Baines Johnson. They conducted riots outside the convention and on the streets of downtown Chicago. Much of it was televised by the TV networks as they were attempting to disrupt the convention. The National Guard was called up and were taunted by demonstrators, resulting in many confrontations. The CMPD serves a jurisdiction with a population of just under 870,000 people. They've got 1,972 sworn officers. I'm going to assume it's a capable and professional organization, but folks, it does lack the resources of a city the size of Chicago. Although state officers, as well as neighboring jurisdiction, can be called if necessary, as they were in Chicago. Well, given the crazed fanaticism of the anti-Trump haters, there could well be a spectacle in Charlotte that exceeds what Americans viewed in Chicago a few years ago. This will be amplified by the availability of cell phones with their video capabilities. I hope, and we should all be praying, that there won't be bloodshed in Charlotte. But I'm not betting on it. And now to the national scene. According to All News Pipeline, you can expect rioting in the streets if President Trump gets a third Supreme Court nominee through. Before getting into the recent news of the Supreme Court's recent announcement about Ruth Bader Ginsburg treatment for a tumor, a malignant tumor, that was found on her pancreas, and how it was not announced until a day after the media caught sight of her leaving the Howard Laboratory at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, and the chaos that is sure to follow, I'd like to offer a reminder of what the scene looked like after President Trump's second Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, when he was confirmed. Remember it? Well, unhinged liberals created a circus during the Kavanaugh confirmation process, many of which having to be dragged out of the proceedings, women protesting in handmaiden's tale costumes. Thousands upon thousands descended on D.C. to protest, and the people clawing at the locked doors of the Supreme Court while others pounded on them and chanted. That was what President Trump's nomination and the Senate confirmation of an Associate Justice to replace another conservative justice. It doesn't take much imagination to imagine the chaos, protests, riots, and spectacle that we would witness if the most liberal Supreme Court justice, 86-year-old Ruth Bader Ginsburg, becomes either too ill to function on the court or passes away, and President Trump gets to nominate a third justice to the Supreme Court. As was pointed out, Ginsburg has been diagnosed with cancer 3 times, colon cancer in 1999, pancreatic cancer in 2009, and lung cancer in 2018. This, folks, is a dramatic happening. The fact that replacing Ginsburg would give President Trump a third Supreme Court justice is going to enrage liberals that are already cited to outrage every single day by the establishment media. Along with the fact that even some liberals are uncomfortable with what they describe as, quote, the dark side of the cult of Ruth Ginsburg, end quote, topped off with the fact that the most liberal Supreme Court justice would be replaced, and undoubtedly with one of the names on Trump's list of replacement, most likely a conservative female replacement, and it's guaranteed to bring liberals to the streets in massive protest numbers. The Supreme Court's going to start its new term on the first Monday in October, with the groups of justices doing work prior to the official start of the term, usually sometime in September. And Supreme Court observers will definitely be looking to see if Ginsburg is president at that time. The thousands or tens of thousands that took to the streets during Kavanaugh will look like a family picnic in comparison to what we can expect if Ginsburg is forced to step down after the latest bout with pancreatic cancer. And, of course, giving Trump his third Supreme Court pick. And by the way, more on the Supreme Court. Our Senate leader, McConnell, along with 52 GOP senators, have sworn to fight the Dems on the Supreme Court. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and 52 GOP chamber members told the Supreme Court last Thursday that Republicans would beat back efforts by the Democrats to pack the nation's highest court. Listen to this carefully, folks. McConnell promises, for our part, this is a quote in a statement where he wrote, "While we remain members of this body, the Democrats' threat to restructure the court is an empty one." End quote. We share Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's view that 9 seems to be a good number, McConnell continued, and it will remain that way as long as we are here. Several of the 2020 Democrat presidential candidates have called for increasing the size of the Supreme Court. This led primarily by the faggot mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He wants the number increased to 15. Currently, the court has a 5-4 conservative majority. Ginsburg, a Democrat, who's among the court's 3 senior justices, said last month that she opposed changing the court's current makeup. That's called commonly packing the court, folks. Roosevelt tried it. It didn't work for him. McConnell said it won't happen as long as he, with the majority of Republicans, are there. And more on the national scene from Judge Jeanine. She points out how the Dems were plotting to replace American citizens with illegals. Kind of interesting. Just came to my attention. The Democrats have been pushing for decriminalization of undocumented immigration, are doing it to expand their voter base to, quote, plot to make America, to remake it, and replace American citizens with illegals. That a quote from Fox News host Judge Jeanine Peril. Think about it. It's a plot to remake America, to replace American citizens with illegals who vote for the Democrats. She told us on Fox Nation, the Todd Starnes show. Starnes had asked Judge Jeanine who Democrats hate more, President Donald Trump or the Americans who voted for him. They hate Trump. He's the one they want to get rid of, her quote. She added, the Democrats are giving illegals licenses, they're against purging voter rolls of deceased Americans, and they're for allowing illegals to enter the country to vote, if not stuffing the ballot boxes. Their plot to remake America is to bring in illegals, change the way the voting system occurs in this country, and give them licenses, she said. They get to vote maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. These are quotes from Judge Perrine. Thought you'd like to know, folks. Just a little bit of an update on the Jeffrey Epstein case. Prince Andrew, that's the second son of the Queen. That's Fergie's ex-husband. Remember Fergie and Princess Diana? They were sister-in-laws, made the press quite often before Diana was killed in that auto accident. Well, anyway, Prince Andrew, that's who we're talking about. He's been involved with Jeffrey Epstein. He does hit back, but he fails to quell the Epstein storm. As it emerges, he spent a week at Jeffrey Epstein's New York mansion after the royal issues an extraordinary statement. The Duke of York stayed over a period of 6 days in 2010. That was revealed on the Mail on Sunday, a publication in Great Britain. Thus, this all happened 2 years after the businessman was convicted of having sex with a child. The Duke said he never suspected the sham financier of criminal behavior. Sounds logical, doesn't it? Wouldn't it be great, or won't it be great, when some more come out? I wonder who all was there. You remember Bill Clinton reportedly on Epstein's private plane 27 times. I wonder who else we might see exposed. Anyway, the Duke of York spent almost a week at convicted pedophile Epstein's infamous New York home. This revelation comes as Prince Andrew issued an extraordinary statement in which he sought to downplay his 10-year relationship with Epstein. In his statement, the second issued since last weekend, when it was revealed that the Queen's favorite son at Epstein's Manhattan mansion, that he was there in 2010, the Duke said he'd never suspected the shamed financier of criminal behavior. He also insisted that he and Epstein, who committed suicide or was murdered in a New York prison cell, only saw each other infrequently and probably no more than only once or twice a year. Didn't stand up, though. However, the Duke stayed over a period of 6 days with Epstein in 2010. That was 2 years after the multimillionaire businessman was convicted of having sex with a child. One exclusive video, which made headlines around the world after its release, showed the prince in the mansion's doorway on December 6, 2010, waving off to a brunette. It prompted first a statement from Buckingham Palace and yesterday another from the Duke himself in which he desperately tried to draw a line through the affair. The Duke admitted that he and Jeffrey Epstein could have potentially met up to 20 times, but at no stage during the limited time I spent with him did I see, witness, or suspect any behavior of the sort that subsequently led to his arrest and conviction. That is a quote from the Duke. Epstein also threw a party at his home on December 2nd, 2010 for the Duke. He was last seen at the property 5 days later. Buckingham Palace declined to discuss the details of his visit. Of course they did. However, some commentators said that far from putting a lid on the scandal, the statement actually raised more questions than it answers. Others said it didn't go far enough. It's understood the Queen was made aware of her second son's statement, but her advisors were not involved in drafting the reply. The prince is currently in Spain on vacation with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, who was said by a source to be wholly supportive of his decision to come clean, if that is coming clean. And this also, Woody Allen, you remembered him. Well, they had a picture of him leaving Jeffrey Epstein's mansion after the lavish party in Prince Andrew's honor. It was also attended by Katie Couric, Chelsea Handler, and George Stephanopoulos. Seeking to put a lid on the scandal, showing little signs of abating, the Duke of York coyly referred to the former association or friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Those who attended the literary party in the Duke's honor back on December 2nd, 2010 in New York, they might be surprised at his choice of words, not least because it was thrown by convicted pedophile Epstein himself in his Upper East Side mansion that's been dubbed the House of Horror and the House of Depravity by the banker's young victims. It was revealed last weekend it was at the mansion where Andrew came to the door and waved goodbye to Catherine Keating. That's the daughter of former Australian Prince Minister Paul Keating. That was on the afternoon of December 6th. His visit is understood to have begun 4 days earlier with a party attended by a who's who's of Manhattan media and show business elite. Isn't this wonderful, folks? It was later that day that Andrew was infamously photographed strolling through Central Park with Epstein. That evening, Epstein was filmed leaving the mansion with an unidentified woman. They were spotted laughing and kissing as they walked away. Well, there's no suggestion of any impropriety on the part of the Duke. The fact he was drawn into Epstein's toxic world and spent nearly a week in his company will surely raise further questions about his judgment. I imagine it will. Again, I'd like to see what the final list of people that were there. I'd like to see who was all involved. Again, I remind you, Bill Clinton was on his plane, I reported 27 times. And on the Inspector General's report on James Comey, well, President Trump reacts to the IG's report on shameful James Comey. He weighed in last Thursday on the DOJ Inspector General's scathing report on former FBI boss James Comey, saying the Bureau's director should be ashamed of himself. Perhaps never in the history of our country has someone been more thoroughly disgraced. James Comey, in the just-released Inspector General report, and he ought to be ashamed of himself. The Department of Justice Inspector General report into James Comey confirmation Thursday, the former FBI boss violated standard procedures during his time in the Trump administration, stating he has set a dangerous example, his quote, in leaking material to the press. But I understand it's not enough to get a conviction, so they're not even going to try Comey. No charges will be filed. But we're also told there's more to come. In closing, I want to bring you as much of this as I can. Banned in Boston, the Christian flag. At one time, the phrase banned in Boston was a popular American phrase which conjured up memories of the city's strict Puritan heritage and generally referred to a movie, a play, or even a written work that had been banned in the city. At one time, Boston officials, who often banned works which they found to have sexual content or foreign language, it was banned. Eventually, the phrase came to be almost a synonym for anything considered naughty. Well, with this move to the left over the decades, it's apparently now the Christian flag that's been banned in Boston. Now the Christian flag cannot be flown. Oh, they can fly the flag of Turkey with the Islamic crescent in it. They can fly the flag for the homosexual movement. That's all okay. They can fly the Chinese flag, and that's okay. But they can't fly the Christian flag. It's going to be appealed in court, folks. If I see more on it, I'll keep you advised. For now, pray for our country. We'll see you next week.